Okay guys, so today we're going to look at subnetting basics, and this is essentially how you go about the process of splitting up a network into subnets and kind of where the IP address ranges would fall based on the number of subnets that you create. So let's go ahead and look at the desktop. Okay, so here we are. Subnetting is the process of dividing a network into smaller networks or subnets by borrowing bits from the IP host segment. So you have the host segment, that's the number of devices that can be on a network, and we're going to borrow some of those and add them to the network segment, which is the network identification. So to calculate subnet address, first of all, the network ID, you got to perform an AND function on the IP address. Remember we learned about ANDing last time, that's basically multiplying. And then determine the broadcast address. You're going to add 2 to the number of host bits minus 1 to the network ID. Now, the broadcast address and the network ID are 2 specialized addresses in the range, and they can't be used for anything else. So if your range extends from 192.168.1 to 192.168.100, then the numbers .1 and .100 can't be used. They're going to be the network ID and the host ID, or the host address rather. So those 2 addresses are not available to install in devices, which means instead of having 100, you're going to have 98. Instead of having 30, you're going to have 28. You're always going to lose, and this is very important, you're always going to lose 2 addresses from your range to support the network ID and the broadcast address. Then the address range is what you have left. So taking out the first one, taking out the last one, all those addresses that you have left, that's going to be the address range. Those are going to be the usable IP addresses. First address of the range and the last address of the range. Those are the usable IP addresses. The first one in the range is going to go to network ID. The last one's going to go to broadcast. So minus those 2, the addresses that you can actually install into a device are going to be the usable IP addresses. The broadcast address, that is the last address in the host network segment. It is not usable. You can't install it into a device. So let's say we're gonna break this address, or we're gonna break this network up. The address that we're given is 192.168.1.12, and it's a class C, so 255.255.0. That means it's going to be a /24 to start with, because we have 24 bits in the host section. So we got 8 bits here, we got 8 bits here, we got 8 bits here. That's 24 bits, pardon me, in the network section, I misspoke. You've got a group of 8 ones here. When you transfer this to binary, 255 is 11111111. Anyway, it's 8 ones. And you've got 3 groups of 8, so you got 24. That means the CIDR is going to be /24 for this network. Okay, so we're going to borrow some host bits. The host bits are those 8 that are covered in this last octet of the subnet mask. Those are the 8 that are zeros. The 24 are the network bits. Those are 1s. The last 8, those zeros, or those zeros are the host bits, and there are 8 of them. So IP network address range starts at 192.168.0. And the number of addresses that it will have available in the /24 CIDR is 256. We know that because there are 8 hosts. There are 8 bits in host, and if you go 2 to the 8th, that gives you 256. So that means the last address in the /24 subnet is going to be 192.168.1.255. Now, why is it not 256? Well, because we start counting at 0. So from 0 to 255 is actually 256 numbers, or addresses in this case. So the first address would be 192.168.0. That's the network ID. You can't use that. You can't install that in anything. You can't put it in a network card. You can't do anything with it except it's the network ID. It has its own job to do. Available hosts you've got from .1 to .254. That is your range. And then the last address of the range, or the last address is .255. That's the broadcast address. You can't do anything with either. So you lose the first and the last addresses. The range of usable host addresses are .1 to .254. That means you have 256 addresses minus 2 is 254. So you have a total from 1 to 254. Those are the addresses that you can put into a network card, or you can give to a computer, or you can assign to a DHCP server. These are the available subnets. Now here's the thing. If you're going to create subnets, you're going to have to create more than you need. For example, if you need 2 subnets and you borrow 1 host bit, you can do that. 2 to the 1th power is 2. And you're going to have 126 usable hosts, because 128 total addresses, you've got to subtract the 2 for the broadcast address and the network address. So that means you have 126 usable addresses. If you want 3 subnets, let's say you want to divide your network up into 3 sections, you're going to have to create 4, because you can't get an odd number. Odd numbers don't work. You're going to end up going, you're going to borrow 2 host bits. 2 squared is 4. That means that's how many subnets you're going to create. Each one of those will contain 62 addresses. Now, actually, they would contain 64. 64 times 2 is 128, which is what we learned about up here. Unfortunately, you're going to lose those 2 addresses from each range, the broadcast and the network ID. So you're only going to get 62 usable addresses in the range. Anytime you want to create from 5 to 8 addresses, you'll borrow 3 bits. You're going to end up creating 8. If you need 5, you're going to have 3 extra ones left over that you're just not going to use. It's a good idea to have those left over for redundancy anyway. Each one will contain 30, not 32, as you might expect, but you're going to lose 2, the network and the broadcast, so they'll contain 30. If you need to create anywhere between 9 and 16 addresses, you'll borrow 4 bits. 2 to the 4th is 16. That means you're going to have 16 possible. You're always going to create more subnets than you need, unless you happen to actually exactly need 16 subnets or 8 subnets or 4 subnets. But for the most part, you're not going to need that. In fact, you're really, once you get up here, you're breaking up a network into 32 pieces or 64 pieces. There's really not a whole lot of point to doing that. We need to know mathematically how to do it, but practically you're going to end up with like 6 assignable hosts or 2 assignable hosts. Or here, if you're going to create between 65 and 128 subnets, if you're dividing your network up that, you're not going to have any available host addresses, so you can't use it. So that would be kind of pointless. Mathematically, we need to know how to do it, but as far as practically goes, usually 2, 3, 4, that's the most you're going to ever need. All right, you got another participation activity. This walks you through the process. Make sure you do these. Number 1, you need the grades, and number 2, it walks you through the process of actually borrowing bits and how to mathematically calculate the number of hosts you get, because what you need to be able to do for a subnet, you need to be able to, number 1, tell me the network ID. You need to tell me the broadcast ID. You need to tell me the usable range. That means the whole range minus the 2 that you can't use. You need to tell me what the /CIDR is. Those are the pieces of information that you need to know. So if you'll work through these subnetting participation activities, that will show you how those things are done. Here's a table. These are the number of these are the subnets that will be created based on how many bits you borrow. It also gives you the network ID and the broadcast address. Remember, you can't do anything with these 2 addresses. So the new subnet, what you're looking at here, is in binary. This is the network ID in binary. This would be 192.168.1.0, and that's the network address. And if we borrowed 3 bits, we're basically going to have 32 addresses in our range, but we can't use the first and last one. So 0's out and 31 is out, because remember we start counting at zeros. That's the other caveat. You start counting at 0, so instead of this being 32, it's 31, because you're going 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on, up to 31. That's the network ID, and that's the broadcast address. You can't use those two, which means that your first usable address is going to be 192.168.1.1. Your last usable address in this subnet is going to be 192.168.1.30. You can't use these two. Same thing here. We've borrowed another bit, or this is our next bit that we've borrowed. This is our next subnet. We've actually created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 subnets here. We've divided this up into 8 subnets. The next one, of course, 31 was our broadcast address. The next subnet starts at 32, but that's the network ID, so we can't use it. It goes all the way to 63, but that's broadcast. We can't use it. So the usable range here is from 33 to 62. We can't use these two, but we can use the next one and the one right before this one. Same thing here. We've got 192.1.64 as our next ID. We borrowed another bit. We can't use .64 and we can't use .95, so our usable range is going to be .65 all the way to .94. Now this sounds a little confusing, but if you work through these participation activities, it will make sense. So here's another one. We're creating subnets. Make sure you work through these. We're borrowing bits. We've created, since we borrowed 2 bits, 2 squared is 4. That's 4 possible subnets. We've created borrowing 2 bits. These are the 2 bits we borrowed. This used to be 8 ones and 8 ones and 8 ones and 8 zeros. We borrowed these 2 and turned them into ones. So now what we've got left are the host bits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we've got 6 bits worth of host. And at that point, then we can create, because we borrowed 2 bits. Because we borrowed 2 bits, we're going to be, since this is, we're going to go 2 to however many bits we borrowed. 2 squared is 4. That's how many subnets we're going to have. Here's the network ID. For each subnet for the 4 we've created. There's the broadcast address for each sub we've created, and there is the usable range of addresses for what we've created. You go through the participation activities and the challenge activity, because that will really help you figure out this. I know it's a little confusing. We should, and particularly if you do the exercises, by the time we get through the chapter, you'll understand it. So we got a challenge activity here. Once we're done with that, then we're going to be ready to move on to the next piece. All right, guys, it can be a little bit confusing with the bits and borrowing and things like that, and doing the calculations. Things to remember. Number 1, you need to remember that you're dividing up your network into subnetworks, into pieces, based on your subnet mask. It starts out as 3 groups of 1 with 8 ones in each group, and then a group of 8 zeros. We're going to turn some of those zeros into ones, and based on the number of those that we turn into ones, that's how many subnets we're going to create. So if I borrow the first 2 zeros and turn them into ones, that means that I'm going to create 2 subnets. No, pardon me, 4 subnets, because you have to square that. So 2 squared is 4. If I borrow the first 3, then I'm going to actually be converting 9 subnets, because 3 squared, 2 to the cube power, pardon me, let me start over. Let me cut all that out. Okay, guys, so what we're doing is, remember, we're creating subnets. In fact, let me start that over completely. All right, guys, so that is subnetting. Remember, you need to do these assignments. I know it seems a little confusing, borrowing bits and calculating and subtracting addresses that we can't use. If you'll do the assignments, you shouldn't have too much trouble with this. Things to remember: you can't use the network address and you can't use the broadcast address. The number of bits you borrowed to to the power of 2, 2 to that power, pardon me, determines how many subnets you create, and the range, the usable range, is the number of addresses in that subnet minus the first one and the last one. Those are the most important things probably that you'll need to remember. If you have any questions, and I suspect that you will, contact me via the Canvas inbox or ask me in class and we'll go through it. Until then, have a good day.